If someone had told me 10 years ago that my life would be irrevocably split into two distinct eras, the time before I understood Cole Madsen and the time after, I would have laughed. Cole was not a person to be understood. He was a geological feature, a mountain on the edge of my life, impassive and immense, and casting a long, cold shadow over everything. He was my best friend's older brother, and for a decade, that was all he was. A fixed point of quiet judgment in my personal cosmos. My world was small and meticulously ordered. It was a seventh-floor apartment in the city with white walls and a single, thriving succulent I'd named Sid. It was the predictable hum on my laptop, the precise grid of code on my screen, the solitary ritual of brewing coffee one perfect cup at a time. I built websites, structures of logic and clean lines that behaved exactly as they were told. My life was much the same. Contained, controlled, safe. Ben was the joyful chaos I allowed inside my walls. We've been inseparable since our first week of college, a friendship forged in late-night study sessions and cheap pizza. He was loud where I was quiet, impulsive where I was cautious. He was the one who dragged me out of my apartment and into the blinding light of the real world. And his world, his real world, was the Madsen family ranch, a sprawling expanse of dust and sky and history that always made me feel like an alien visitor. And on that ranch, there was Cole. Cole was 4 years older, a man forged from the same earth he worked. While Ben had fled to the city for college and a marketing degree, Cole had stayed. He'd dug his roots deep into the soil, his hands permanently stained with the work of it. From my distant vantage point, he seemed more myth than man. I saw him across crowded holiday dinners, a silent monolith at the far end of the table. I saw him from the passenger seat of Ben's truck, a silhouette on horseback against a searing sunset. He was all broad shoulders and weathered denim, a jaw that seemed perpetually set, and eyes the color of a stormy sky that rarely, if ever, landed on me. When they did, it was a fleeting, dismissive glance, a quick scan that took in my city clothes, my soft hands, my general lack of physical imposition, and then moved on, unimpressed. At least, that's the story I wrote. It was a story of disapproval. The hard-working, authentic son of the soil looking down on his brother's flimsy, digital friend. It was a narrative that made sense. It kept him at a safe distance, a predictable antagonist in a story I thought I controlled. The distance between us was more than just his quiet disdain. It was a chasm of experience. His world smelled of hay and sweat and rain-soaked earth. Mine smelled of ozone and recycled air. His hands were a roadmap of calluses and scars, each one a testament to a physical battle won. My hands knew only the smooth, cool plastic of a keyboard. He was a man of action, of tangible results. I was a man of theory, of invisible structures built from light and logic. We were different languages, and I was convinced he had no interest in a translator. So I kept my distance, content to orbit the warmth of Ben's friendship and to treat Cole like a force of nature to be respected and, whenever possible, avoided. My heart, a frantic bird I kept in a very small cage, would beat a little faster when he entered a room, but I told myself it was intimidation. Fear. It was simpler that way. Safer. Then Ben decided to get married, and he decided to have the wedding at the ranch. A full week of festivities. A week where the entire wedding party would be staying in the sprawling family home. And I, of course, was the best man. The disruption was seismic. It was a meteorite crashing into the calm, predictable sea of my life. My routine was shattered. My carefully constructed solitude was invaded. For 7 days, I would have to live inside the world I had only ever observed from the periphery. For 7 days, I would be trapped in the same house as Cole Madsen. The drive out felt like a journey to a foreign country. The city's concrete towers and sharp angles bled into sprawling suburbs, then softened into rolling hills. The air changed, losing its metallic edge and taking on the sweet, green scent of living things. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. This was not my territory. Ben greeted me at the door with a hug that threatened to crack my ribs, his excitement a tangible energy field. The house was already buzzing, a hive of happy chaos. Cousins and aunts and florists and caterers swirled through the rooms. And in the center of it all, directing the storm with a quiet, unshakable calm, was Cole. He was a fixed point in the chaos. He didn't raise his voice, didn't rush. He simply moved with a kind of physical certainty that made people listen. He lifted heavy boxes as if they were empty, gave concise instructions that were followed without question, and navigated the crowded space with an economy of movement that was almost mesmerizing to watch. He finally noticed me hovering awkwardly in the entryway. His eyes, that familiar stormy gray, met mine for a fraction of a second longer than usual. "Leo," he said. The word was a low rumble, not unkind, but not warm either. It was just a statement of fact. "You are here." Then he turned away to solve some new crisis involving tablecloths. And just like that, I was in his world. Not an observer, but a participant, a guest in the heart of the mountains territory. My meticulously ordered life was over. For the next week, I would be living in the shadow of Cole Madsen, and the thought filled me with a terrifying, unwelcome thrill. The first few days were a blur of assigned tasks. I was surprisingly useful. My penchant for organization made me the perfect person to manage spreadsheets of seating charts and vendor schedules. I spent most of my time on the wide, shaded porch with my laptop, a small island of digital order amidst the rustic chaos. From there, I had a perfect, unobstructed view of the ranch. Of Cole, I started to notice things, details I'd never seen from a distance. I watched him mend a sagging fence line, the muscles in his back and shoulders moving with a fluid, practiced strength under his t-shirt. There was no wasted motion, just a deep, ingrained knowledge of the task at hand. It was a kind of physical poetry, and I found myself unable to look away. I saw the fine, white scar that cut through his left eyebrow, a detail invisible from across a dinner table. I wondered how he got it. A fight? An accident? A story I would never know. I saw the way the sun had bleached the tips of his dark hair, and a network of fine lines that fanned out from the corners of his eyes when he squinted at the horizon. These weren't the features of an impassive monolith. They were the marks of a life lived under an open sky. One afternoon, I saw him with one of the horses, a young filly that was skittish and nervous. He didn't use force. He just stood with her, speaking in a low, soothing murmur, his large, calloused hand resting gently on her neck. He was patient. He was kind. He exuded a quiet competence that was less about dominance and more about a deep, intuitive understanding. The man I was watching was not the cold, judgmental figure I had constructed in my mind. He was something else entirely, something more complex and infinitely more dangerous to my carefully guarded heart. The observation was a slow, creeping erosion of the walls I'd built around him. He wasn't just Ben's brother anymore. He was Cole, a man who was tired, I realized. I saw it in the slump of his shoulders late at night when he thought no one was watching. I saw it in the way he'd rub the back of his neck, a gesture of profound weariness. He was carrying the weight of this wedding, this ranch, this family, and he was doing it alone. The first touch happened on day 3. It was an accident, utterly mundane. Ben's fiancée, Sarah, had ordered a monstrosity of a floral arrangement for the main entryway, a behemoth of wood and wire and cascading greenery. It took 2 people to move. Cole grunted, taking one side, and looked around for help. Every other man was occupied. His eyes landed on me. There was no one else. "Now, give me a hand." It was a command, not a request. My heart did a painful little flip. I put my laptop aside and walked over, my body feeling clumsy and inadequate next to his easy strength. "Where do you want it?" "Just over there." He gestured with his head toward the space beside the grand staircase. We began to lift it. The wood was rough and heavy. I struggled to get a good grip. He adjusted, his own hold effortless. We shuffled sideways, a clumsy, uncoordinated dance. My foot caught on the edge of a rug. I stumbled. The entire arrangement tilted precariously. "Whoa, careful," his voice was sharp. To steady myself and the arrangement, I shifted my grip. My hand, sliding along the rough wood, slammed directly into his. It wasn't a brush. It was a collision, skin against skin. My soft, useless palm against his hard, calloused one. A jolt went through me. Not a spark. A full-blown electrical current, hot and sharp and utterly shocking. It shot up my arm, exploded in my chest, and made the air catch in my throat. My skin burned where we touched. Every nerve ending screamed. My mind went completely, terrifyingly blank. For a single, eternal second, there was nothing in the universe but the searing heat of his hand against mine. My reaction was pure instinct. Panic. I snatched my hand back as if I'd touched a hot stove. The sudden loss of my support caused the arrangement to lurch violently. Flowers and ferns rained down on the floor. Cole, with a muttered curse, caught the whole thing before it could crash. His fingers, strong and sure, closed over the very spot my hand had just been. He shot me a look. It wasn't angry. It was confused, puzzled, as if he'd felt it too. Sorry, I stammered, my voice thin and reedy. My hand slipped. He just stared at me for a moment, his stormy eyes unreadable. Then he grunted, hefted the arrangement in a place by himself, and turned away without another word. He left me standing there, my hand tingling, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The air was thick with unspoken energy. The mountain had shifted, and I felt the ground beneath my feet begin to crumble. The power dynamic between us, the one I had so carefully defined, was built on a simple premise. He was capable, and I was not. Not in his world, anyway. He was the sun. I was a distant, pale moon. But on the fourth day, the sun faltered. The crisis arrived in the form of 1,000 tiny lights. Sarah had a vision for the reception, which was to be held outdoors under the vast, starry sky. The vision involved an intricate web of string lights, crisscrossing between the ancient oak trees that dotted the lawn. It was supposed to look magical. Instead, it looked like a disaster. Half the strands wouldn't turn on. The ones that did flickered erratically, casting a sad, strobe-like effect over the half-set tables. Ben was on the verge of a full-blown panic attack. Sarah was trying very hard not to cry. Cole was standing on a ladder, his face a thunderous mask of frustration, ripping at the wires with a ferocity that was making things worse. "It's the generator," he growled, more to himself than anyone else. "The load is too much. Can you fix it?" Ben asked, his voice trembling slightly. "I'm trying." Cole snapped, yanking another connection loose. A whole new section went dark. I stood back, watching. This was a system. A problem with a logical solution. It was code, just written in wire and voltage instead of Python. Without thinking, I moved forward. "Maybe you're overloading one specific circuit," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "If you redistribute the strands across multiple breakers on the generator, you could balance the load." Cole froze on the ladder, his back to me. For a long moment, he didn't move. I expected him to tell me to get lost, to mock the city boy for thinking he knew anything about generators. The silence stretched thin and tight. Then, slowly, he turned his head and looked down at me. His expression wasn't angry or dismissive. It was wary, assessing. "You know about this stuff?" "A little," I admitted. "It's just problem-solving, like debugging." He stared at me for another second, then gave a short, sharp nod. "Fine, get up here. Show me." And just like that, the world tilted on its axis. He climbed down and I climbed up. He stood below, holding the ladder steady, his big hands wrapped around the wooden struts. I was the one in charge. He was the one looking up, waiting for instructions. It felt surreal, like a dream I couldn't quite believe. "Okay," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Unplug that main feeder line." The thick black 1-inch he did. "Now, we need to trace these 3 strands back to their source for the next hour." We worked. I directed from the ladder, and he moved on the ground, his frustration slowly replaced by a focused quiet. He handed me tools. He held wires in place. He listened. He didn't question my logic. He just executed my instructions with a quiet efficiency. We were a team. The thought was so foreign, so jarring, it made me feel dizzy. Finally, I reconnected the last plug. "Okay," I said, my heart in my throat. "Try it now." Cole walked over to the generator and flipped the main switch. There was a collective gasp from Ben and Sarah. The entire lawn lit up. 1,000 tiny lights twinkled in the dusk, casting a warm, magical glow over everything. It was perfect. Ben let out a whoop of joy and grabbed Sarah, spinning her around. I stayed on the ladder, my legs feeling weak with relief. I looked down. Cole wasn't looking at the lights. He was looking at me. His face was in shadow, but I could feel the weight of his gaze. He walked back to the base of the ladder. "Thanks," he said. The word was low and rough, but it was genuine. It was more than an acknowledgement. It was an admission. He had needed me. "No problem," I managed to say. I started to climb down. My foot missed a rung. I slipped, my body lurching sideways. Before I could even process what was happening, his hands were there. Strong, steady. One on my back, the other on my arm, holding me, preventing my fall. His touch was firm, impersonal, but it sent that same bolt of lightning through my system. This time, I didn't pull away. I couldn't. I just froze, caught in his grip, the scent of him, sun, sweat, and clean earth filling my senses. He held me for a second too long. A beat of stillness in the celebratory chaos. Then he let go and stepped back, clearing his throat. The space between us crackled with a new, terrifying energy. The playing field wasn't just level anymore. It had been completely redrawn, and neither of us knew the new rules. The night before the wedding, the sky broke. A storm rolled in off the plains, a spectacular display of celestial fury. The wind howled, rattling the old farmhouse to its bones. Rain came down in solid, blinding sheets. And then, with a final, deafening crack of thunder that shook the very ground, the power went out. The house plunged into a sudden, shocking darkness, punctuated by the frantic flashes of lightning outside. A collective groan went through the assembled family. Candles were found, their flickering flames casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. The mood shifted from pre-wedding jitters to a kind of cozy, enforced intimacy. But Cole was on edge. I could see it in the tense line of his jaw, illuminated by the candlelight. "I need to check the barn," he announced to the room at large. The new foal gets spooked by thunder. He grabbed a heavy-duty flashlight from a drawer and pulled on his boots. No one else moved to join him. It was his domain, his responsibility. But I couldn't sit still. The energy in the house felt suffocating, and the thought of him out there alone in the storm. It pulled at me, making a decision that my old, cautious self would have screamed at. I stood up. "I'll come with you," I said. Every head in the room turned to look at me. Ben gave me a quizzical smile. Cole just stared, his expression unreadable in the flickering light. I expected him to refuse, to tell me to stay where it was warm and dry. Instead, he just gave a curt nod, grabbed that other flashlight. The short run to the barn was a battle against the elements. The wind tore my clothes, and the rain soaked me to the skin in seconds. It was exhilarating and terrifying. Inside the barn, the sound of the storm was muffled to a dull roar. The air was thick with the warm, earthy smells of hay, animals, and rain. It was a sanctuary from the tempest outside. Cole's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, finding the stall with the mare and her foal. The young horse was trembling, its eyes wide with fear. Cole moved in, murmuring to it in that same low, calm voice I'd heard him use before. He didn't touch it at first, just let his presence be a soothing anchor in the storm. I stayed back, holding my own light steady, feeling like an intruder on a sacred, private moment. He eventually calmed the animal, stroking its neck until its trembling subsided. The roar of the rain on the tin roof was a constant, hypnotic drumbeat. We were in a small, self-contained world, cut off from everyone else. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was heavy, full of all the things that had shifted in the last few days. He finally turned away from the horse, his flashlight beam sweeping across the floor before landing on me. "You didn't have to come out here, I know," I said. "Didn't want you to be alone." The words were out before I could stop them. Too honest, too vulnerable. He was quiet for a long time. The only sounds were the storm and the soft shifting of animals in their stalls. He walked over to a stack of hay bales and sat down, letting out a long, weary breath. He gestured for me to join him. I did, my heart thudding a nervous rhythm against my ribs. We sat in the dark, our flashlight beams painting lazy circles on the dusty floor. "You're good with him," he said, his voice low. "Ben, the statement caught me off guard. He's my best friend, I know." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was different. Softer, stripped of its usual gruff armor. "I used to be jealous of you," my breath hitched. Of all the things I expected him to say, that was not one of them. Jealous? Of me? Why? He let out a short, humorless laugh. "Look at this place, Leo. This is my life. It's all I've ever known. When Ben went off to college, he got a new world, and you were the gatekeeper of that world. He'd come home talking about concerts and museums and all this stuff I didn't understand. He'd talk about you, the smart friend, the one who got him through his classes. He had this whole other life, and you were at the center of it. I was just here, the brother who stayed behind." The confession hung in the air between us, raw and shocking. The entire narrative I had built, his disapproval, his disdain, it all came crashing down. It wasn't about me at all. It was about him, his own loneliness, his own insecurity. I never thought. I started, but my voice trailed off. What could I say? That I had always been jealous of him, of his strength, his certainty, his connection to this land? I wasn't. I wasn't judging you, he continued, as if reading my mind. All those years when I was quiet, I just didn't know how to talk to you. You were from his world. I didn't know how to fit in, Cole. I whispered, his name feeling foreign and yet perfectly right on my tongue. He finally turned to look at me, the beam of his flashlight momentarily illuminating his face. The weariness was still there, but so was something else. A vulnerability that cracked my heart wide open. The lightning flashed, and in that stark, blue-white light, I saw a decade of misunderstanding laid bare. He reached out, his movements slow, hesitant. His fingers brushed against my cheek. It wasn't an accident this time. It was a question. His callous thumb traced the line of my jaw, and the touch was electric, but in a different way. Not a shock, but a deep, humming current that resonated in the very marrow of my bones. I leaned into his touch, my eyes fluttering shut. This is happening. This is real. He moved closer, the scent of him, of rain and earth, overwhelming me. His other hand came up to cup the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my damp hair. He was so close I could feel the warmth of his breath on my skin. "Leo," he murmured, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. And then he kissed me. It wasn't a frantic, passionate kiss. It was slow, tentative, a question asked in the dark. His lips were chapped and firm against mine, and the kiss was one of discovery. It was a decade of unspoken words, of misinterpreted glances, of simmering, unacknowledged tension finally finding a release. I opened my mouth to him, a silent surrender, and the kiss deepened, becoming more certain, more sure. My hands came up to grip his shirt, holding on as if the storm outside had moved inside me. It was a kiss that remade the world. And in the warm, safe darkness of the barn, surrounded by the storm, I fell for the first time in my life, completely and utterly found. I woke to the disorienting sensation of sunlight on my face. Bright, unforgiving, wedding day sunlight. For a confused second, I didn't know where I was. Then it all came flooding back. The storm, the barn, the confession, the kiss. I was in my bed in the guest room. Alone. I couldn't remember leaving the barn, couldn't remember walking back to the house. The last thing I recalled was the feeling of Cole's lips on mine, the solid weight of him beside me in the hay. He must have carried me back, or guided me. And then he'd left. A cold knot of dread began to form in my stomach, a familiar, sickening companion. The morning after, the crucible of doubt, my anxiety, always lurking just beneath the surface, roared to life. It was a mistake. The thought was a shard of ice in my chest. It was the storm, the darkness, the intimacy of the confession. It was a moment of weakness, of heightened emotion. It wasn't real. Now, in the cold, rational light of day, he regretted it. Of course he did. Today was his brother's wedding. What had we done? I got out of bed, my body feeling heavy and foreign. I dressed in a haze, my mind a frantic spiral of self-recrimination. You idiot. You stupid, hopeful idiot. You read everything wrong. You always do. I forced myself to go downstairs. The house was a whirlwind of activity, even more chaotic than before. Hairdressers, makeup artists, photographers. Laughter and excited chatter filled the air. It felt abrasive, an assault on my raw nerves. And then I saw him. Cole was standing by the kitchen counter, drinking coffee, already dressed in a suit. He looked impossibly handsome, solid and composed. He was talking to one of the groomsmen, a cousin of his. He laughed at something the cousin said, a deep, easy sound. It was like watching a stranger. This was not the vulnerable man from the barn. This was the impassive mountain, restored to its full, intimidating height. He turned his head, and his eyes met mine across the crowded room. My heart stopped. I waited for a sign, a smile, a nod, anything. I got nothing. His eyes were flat, blank. He held my gaze for a single, excruciating second, and then he looked away, turning his back to me to resume his conversation. The cut was so swift, so absolute, it stole the air from my lungs. It was a physical blow. The cold dread in my stomach turned into a churning sea of nausea. I was right. It was a mistake, a massive, world-altering mistake, and he was already pretending it never happened. The rest of the day was a special kind of hell, a performance. I had to smile. I had to make a speech. I had to stand beside Ben at the altar and watch him marry the love of his life, all while feeling like my own world was collapsing in on itself. Cole and I were in constant proximity, standing next to each other for photos, sitting at the same head table. But the space between us was a frozen, silent void. He never looked at me. He never spoke to me. If we accidentally brushed past each other, he would flinch away as if burned. My old solitude, the one I had so carefully curated in my city apartment, came rushing back. But it was different now. It was no longer a comfortable, quiet space. It was an absence, a hollow ache where the warmth of the previous night had been. The silence was a physical weight, pressing down on me, suffocating me. Every laugh, every toast, every cheerful song felt like a personal mockery. During the reception, I watched him from across the dance floor. He was the perfect son, the perfect brother. He danced with his mother. He clapped his brother on the back. He moved through the celebration with an easy grace, a man completely at home. And every so often, when he thought no one was watching, I'd see it. A flicker of something in his eyes, a tension in his jaw. He'd stare out into the darkness beyond the string lights, my string lights, I thought with a bitter pang, and he would look utterly, completely lost. Or maybe I was just projecting, seeing what I so desperately wanted to see. A sign that I wasn't the only one in agony. A sign that the man from the barn was still in there somewhere. But he never sought me out. The silence stretched, hour after agonizing hour. The wedding was a beautiful, joyful success, and I had never felt more alone in my life. The party began to wind down. The band packed up. Guests started to drift away, their laughter fading into the cool night air. I couldn't bear it anymore. I escaped to the wide front porch, nursing a glass of whiskey I didn't want, and stared out at the dark, silent ranch. My flight back to the city was at noon tomorrow. Back to my safe, white walls. Back to my ordered, empty life. The thought was unbearable. Footsteps sounded on the wooden porch behind me. Heavy, certain footsteps. I didn't need to turn around. I knew who it was. My entire body went rigid. I braced myself for the final, killing blow. The awkward apology. The let's just forget this happened. Cole didn't speak. He just came to stand beside me at the railing, shoulder to shoulder, but not touching. He stared out into the same darkness. The silence was different now. Not the loud, painful silence of the reception, but a heavy, exhausted quiet. He let out a long breath. "I'm an idiot," he said, his voice rough with fatigue. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My throat was too tight. Today, he continued, his voice barely a whisper. Today was hell. I finally turned my head to look at him. His face was etched with exhaustion. The confident mask he'd worn all day was gone, and the vulnerable man from the barn was back. He looked wrecked. I panicked, he said, finally meeting my eyes. His gaze was raw, pleading. I woke up this morning, and all I could think about was that it was Ben's wedding day, the most important day of his life. And what I'd done, what we'd done, it felt selfish. It felt like I was going to blow up my family, like I was making his day about me, about us. He shook his head, a gesture of self-disgust. So I did the only thing I could think of. I shut it down. I built a wall. I decided to pretend it didn't happen, just for today, just to get through it. For Ben. He looked away, his knuckles white where he gripped the railing. That silence today, ignoring you. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. Harder than any day's work on this ranch. Every minute was a choice. Every minute I had to actively choose not to look at you, not to talk to you. And every minute felt like I was ripping out my own guts. The confession washed over me, a wave of relief so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. He wasn't pretending. He hadn't forgotten. He was just as tormented as I was. He was just better at hiding it. I thought you regretted it. I whispered, the words tasting like ash. Regret it? He let out a sharp, pained laugh. Leo, that was the only real thing that's happened to me in years. He turned to face me fully, his expression deadly serious. I was terrified. I'm still terrified. I don't know what this is or how it works. But I know that today, living without it. That's not an option. He reached into the pocket of his suit trousers and pulled something out. He pressed it into my palm. It was cool metal, heavy and old-fashioned. A single key. The foreman's cabin, he said, his voice low and steady. It's down by the creek. It's been empty for years. I've been fixing it up. For me. A place to breathe. To be myself. He closed my fingers around the key with his own, his large, warm hand engulfing mine. Your flight is at noon. It wasn't a question. Don't go. Stay. Don't go back to the city tomorrow. Stay here. With me. It was more than an invitation. It was a plea. It was a promise. It was the key to a world I never knew existed, a future I'd never dared to imagine. It was a tangible act of commitment, offered up in the quiet aftermath of the storm. I looked down at the key in my hand, then back up at his face, at the hope and the fear warring in his stormy eyes. My own carefully constructed walls, the ones I had lived behind for my entire adult life, didn't just crumble. They evaporated. They turned to dust. Okay, I said, my voice shaking only slightly. Okay, a slow smile spread across his face, a real one. It was like watching the sun rise. He didn't say anything else. He just kept holding my hand, the key a warm promise between our palms, as we stood together on the porch, the quiet of the ranch settling around us like a blanket. The new beginning had already begun. The following months were a study in quiet revelation. I canceled my flight. I told my clients I was working remotely from a new location, a truth that was both technically accurate and a monumental understatement. I moved into the foreman's cabin, a small, rustic space that Cole had painstakingly restored with his own hands. It smelled of fresh pine and old stone, and it quickly became more of a home than my sterile city apartment had ever been. We learned each other's rhythms, not with grand declarations, but in the small, domestic spaces in between. I learned that he was an early riser, moving through the pre-dawn quiet with a reverence I came to adore. I would wake to the smell of coffee already brewing, a silent offering left on the small kitchen counter before he headed out for the day's work. He learned that I couldn't function without that first cup. He learned that I hummed a low, tuneless sound when I was deep in concentration over a line of code. He learned that I preferred the mountains to the sea, and that I was terrified of spiders. One evening, he found me standing on a chair, pointing a trembling finger at a tiny black speck on the wall. He didn't laugh. He just gently scooped it into his hands and released it outside, his touch as careful with the spider as it had been with the nervous foal. Our intimacy was built in these quiet moments, sharing meals at the small wooden table, sitting on the cabin's porch in the evening, watching the stars appear in the vast, unpolluted sky, my head resting on his shoulder, sleeping in the same bed, the initial anxiety of the morning after replaced by a profound sense of peace. There was a simple, grounding rightness to falling asleep next to the solid, breathing warmth of him and waking up to find him still there. Ben's reaction was one of stunned, dawning comprehension, followed by a grin so wide I thought his face might split. "Well," he'd said, clapping me on the shoulder a little too hard. "It's about time my two favorite people figured it out. There was no judgment, no confusion. Only a deep, uncomplicated happiness that we had found each other." One Sunday morning, a few months in, I was at the table, my laptop open, trying to untangle a particularly nasty bit of code. The sun streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The cabin was quiet except for the click of my keyboard. The door opened, and Cole came in, bringing the scent of the outdoors with him. Fresh air, dust, and the faint, sweet smell of hay. He didn't say a word. He just walked over, placed a fresh mug of coffee beside my laptop, and leaned down to press a kiss to the top of my head. It was a simple gesture, a routine we had established. But in that moment, it felt like everything. I stopped typing and leaned back, resting my head against his stomach. He wrapped his arms around my shoulders, his chin coming to rest on my hair. We stood there for a long moment, watching the sunlight stream across the wooden floor. I looked around the small, cozy cabin. I looked at my laptop, my connection to the life I used to have. And I looked out the window at the sprawling, beautiful, demanding land that was his life. The two worlds had not collided. They had merged. I thought about the man I was before I came here for that wedding. The man who lived in a white box in the sky, who built walls of logic and routine to keep the messy, unpredictable world at bay. He had been safe. He had been in control. And he had been profoundly, deeply lonely. He was a stranger to me now. Cole was the plot twist I never saw coming. He was the storm that had torn through the carefully manicured garden of my life, ripping everything up by the roots. I had been so terrified of the disruption, so afraid of the chaos. But the storm had passed, and in its wake, something new had been given the space to grow. Something stronger and truer than anything that had been there before. He hadn't just entered my life, he had given me a new one. A life where my heart was no longer a frantic bird in a cage, but a wild thing flying free under an open sky. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I was finally, truly home.